Welcome to the first installment of my guide series where I use stock photos, paint and some examples from in-game to try to make you a better pilot in War Thunder. And before we start, I'm gonna do this at the start because otherwise it's going to be forgotten. I would like to see a comment on what you want to see next. I would like to see some support, as I don't want to waste my time doing these, as these take me a lot of time to actually make, and time is something I don't have a lot of at the moment. So if the support is going to be relatively low, I'm not too sure if I'm actually going to continue making these. I'm not going to ask for something as stupid as a like goal. I would just like to see some support, see some interaction, so I know what to do next. And with that bogus out of the way, let's start hitting some shots. Before we get into the technique of aiming, I want to touch on some general knowledge as well as some tips. The first thing you really have to keep in mind is that the camera is not directly behind your gun, so it's a bit offset. This isn't as much of a problem at longer ranges, but at closer ranges you can clearly see, as well as in this video on the right, that the guns don't really line up. So at extreme close distances you just want to shoot a little bit too high. If you are also using vertical targeting, make sure to compensate for this even more. And if you don't know what vertical targeting is, make sure to stick around till later in this video. And that brings me to the next point, which includes zooming in. I took a screenshot, stationary of course, so you can actually see the difference, and then I overlaid what the actual zooming did. And to determine how much the camera actually zooms in, I made it so that the zoomed picture would actually fit the normal picture by multiplying it by a factor of 0.25, so the zoom is about 4 times. And I want to start with the negatives of zooming in first. You can counter these by just looking around more and not zooming in too much. But as you can see with the green bracket, you're going to lose a lot of situational awareness. Everything that's going on beyond those brackets, you're not going to be seeing. So make sure to zoom out and keep looking around every now and then to make sure that no one is sneaking up on you. And if you can do that consistently, you will pretty much diminish all the negatives of zooming in. The only problem sometimes is that they're not going to fit on your screen, because they're going fast, they're going perpendicular to you, and they will be out of your screen as you're trying to shoot. And zooming in then will make it so that you can't see the enemy, making leading extremely hard. And now for the positives of aiming, it's true you don't get an inherent accuracy boost. It does make it a lot easier to get your crosshair right where you want the crosshair to be, as everything is relatively 4 times as big. Imagine you had to hit the middle of that green circle I just drew. Would you rather shoot it like this or like this, so I can actually see the hole in the middle? Even though your guns still go the same trajectory and have the same accuracy, you can still place your crosshair a little bit more accurate on the screen, making your shot a lot more precise. And the other benefit, which is in my opinion the biggest one, you can see the enemy plane much clearer, which makes it a lot easier to see where he's going. And you can see his control surfaces, which makes it so that you can actually see what he's doing as he's doing it, instead of just reacting to the movement. And now you got a basic understanding of how the camera works, we can start looking at what you actually came here for, and that's a step-by-step guide on how to actually get your guns on target. The first and most crucial step of aiming is observing and deciding where the enemy plane is going to be in the next couple of seconds. There are however 2 little notes to this heading as well, because you need to know how far he is and how fast he is going. After you determine the flight path of the enemy plane, you want to know how long it will take your guns to reach the target. So you need to know your ballistics, which includes the drop of your guns and the velocity of your guns. First we need to determine if the enemy player is just going straight or if he's actually maneuvering. First things first, we're not going to go too fast, we're going to look at the guy flying straight. There will pop up a video on the right, and just before I'm going to fire I'm going to pause it so you can see what I'm going to do. And because he's flying straight, this becomes very easy, especially due to the contrail that you can see behind his plane as well, because that's the path he just took. Since he's not moving, that path will be the path he's going to take as well, so you can just prolong the contrail behind his plane and then draw the line out in front of him. Now that we have done the easy part, which is determining his flight path, we're going to look where he's going to be in the next 2 seconds. I take 2 seconds at this point because most guns go roughly 800 meters a second. And he is 1.8 kilometers away. Luckily we can determine where he's going to be with a very simple step, and that's just looking at him for 2 seconds and kind of guessing where he's going to end up being. So let's just look at him for 2 seconds and see where he ends up. The first thing we do again is draw the simple lines. Of course the 2 seconds is just an example. You can do whatever you want. I like to take the 2 or the 3 seconds because I don't need more. If you're not as experienced, you might take 5 seconds, maybe 6, it's not a problem, as long as you get the measurement correctly. So now I'm going to guess that the guy is going to be here in relatively 2 seconds. And then we move to the next step, which is ballistics, aka knowing your guns. The A&M trees we're using in this clip are roughly 850 meters a second. Of course we just measured the distance we're going to shoot at for 800, but because the rounds lose some speed as they travel, the 800 meters per second mark will be roughly correct. And so I can basically use the cross I have right there as the estimation of where I have to lead. Of course, if I'm using something like a 108, which is only 500 meters a second, I will have to drag the thing way up. If I'm using 50 cals, I can drag that thing closer to the enemy plane. And all we have to do now is simply aim a little bit above the cross to compensate for the drop of the round. And this also goes for short range shots. Lead a bit too much. So what you really want to do is basically overestimate his speed, lead too much, keep shooting, don't move the crosser anymore. And if he doesn't move, he's going to fly through it and he's going to die. And just a general tip for if you want to aim and you don't know someone's heading and he's shooting. As you can see right here, he is shooting, spraying his 30 mils. And when you spray your 30 mils, you'll make a very nice line. You basically tell me, hey, this is my heading. And you can just use that line as the indication I used in the previous clip. For the techniques, I've broken it down into two separate categories. On one hand we have tracking, where you try to track the enemy, preferably use that closer range or low damage dealing guns, where you really have to get as many rounds on target as you can. And on the other hand we have leading, where you just shoot in front of his flight path, you let him fly through your rounds and you hope he blows up. Preferably used by high damage dealing guns, where you don't need a lot of rounds on target. This is also advisable if you of course lack the experience with a certain gun, as you don't really need to know the ballistics. You can just shoot in front of him and he will fly through the rounds and hopefully blow up. Tracking is basically the same thing as leading. You just want to make sure that you keep updating the heading, and because it's mostly in dogfights, I will show you some tips to keep your guns on target. As he is flying straight, it's relatively easy. You just use his engine, you prolong it, you basically try to shoot in the middle, but now he starts to turn. And because we're not flying a UFO that can do a 90-degree turn in half a second, we're looking at a plane that will drift out of its flight path. And this is what the blue line is for. This showcases the path the plane is actually taking. The green line is what it looks like the plane is taking, where the nose is pointing, but because of the inertia, the plane will very slowly drift out of that line. So you want to make sure that you're really shooting where the plane is actually going, instead of where the nose is pointing. Say someone is stalling out, his nose is pointing straight up, but he is falling straight down. So you might want to take a good look to where people are flying. And in the turn it's relatively easy, you just want to shoot outside of his turn, just as the blue line indicates. I'm now going to play it very slowly, and I want you to pay very close attention to my crosshair. And as you can see, I'm shooting kind of on his left wing. And I'm doing this because he will slowly drift into it. The engine is in the middle of his plane, which is something I want to hit, because these guns do absolutely nothing, and you can tell there goes his engine by me shooting in the middle. Onto something I see quite a bit of people struggle with, it's speed and range. Your guns might have a maximum range of 2 kilometers, but this doesn't mean that you can shoot someone from 2 kilometers away. At least this is the case if someone is flying away from you. As showcased in the little diagrams, if someone is going 140 kph and he's 1.5 kilometers away, you might as well hit him. But if someone is 1 kilometer away and he's going 900 kph, there's a very big chance he's going to outrun your shells. And yes, it's not like real life where the shells will drop to the ground. This is where at 2 kilometers or 2.5 kilometers, it depends on the distance that's set in the files, the shells will just disappear, so there's no chance of you hitting them. The amount of people, and especially in jets, that I can see spraying their 50 cals at 1.6 kilometers away as I'm going 900 kph, there's just no way you're gonna hit me. Even if you have the best aim in the world, the shells will disappear. You look like someone that just bought a premium F-35 and you're just wasting your ammo. So don't be one of these people, hold your fire. And that brings me to the next point, which includes convergence as well as vertical targeting. If you don't know, convergence is the position where the rounds will meet each other, whether horizontally or vertically. And two questions I get asked quite frequently are, is there a best convergence and is vertical targeting worth it? And to be perfectly honest, it's all personal preference, as long as you don't go below that 300 meters mark. Because looking at the previous thing I said about the relative speed, say you have 300 meters convergence and you're shooting at someone, for him to be in your convergence you will have to shoot about 250-200 meters, because he is flying away from you, and your rounds will converge 300 meters after being shot, not 300 meters in front of you. So to really determine what kind of convergence you should use, you want to take your average shooting distance at about 50 to 100 meters to compensate for people flying away from you, round that number off to the closest convergence you can pick, and just take that. And you don't have to use the same convergence for every plane. If you use a plane with very bad guns, you might want to close the distance and shoot at a closer range, so you might want to bring that convergence down a little bit as well. And on the other end of the spectrum we have using no convergence or very high convergence, which makes it an absolute pain to kill people at close range. You can imagine that shooting someone from right behind, as you have wing mounted guns with high convergence, at like 400 meters, what's going to happen is your rounds are going to go over and under his wings. The wings are very thin and you're not going to be hitting it from right behind. Of course you can counter this by using one wing to aim, but by doing this you will literally lose half your damage output, so you will be much better off just using a proper convergence. Say you're debating between 500 and 600 meters, just use the lower one. You're going to be shooting at closer ranges much more than you're going to be shooting at the longer ranges. And now onto vertical targeting. I always say if you're not used to it, don't use it, and it also goes vice versa, because this stuff can really throw you off, especially so at closer ranges. But first we want to know what vertical targeting actually does. As you can see on another one of my Picassos, what vertical targeting basically does is lob the bullets upwards so that their paths will cross in a certain distance in front of you. This can be somewhat helpful, but it's very situational, because vertical targeting only works when you're flying level. It lobs the rounds upwards, so when you're flying sideways, the rounds will also fly upwards, but not in relation to the ground. And that's all I have for you this time. I hope it was helpful. Don't forget to keep practicing, as this is a very experience based thing. So keep grinding, keep trying to improve. And I will see you all, if you actually made it this far, in the next one.